Thank you, Jean. We really appreciate that. And communication is essential because we need to be spreading awareness around the incidence of homelessness and what we are doing to address it. So one of the opportunities that we have when we're out counting, homeless counts typically focus on just getting the numbers, but it's really hard to be out there when you are seeing somebody in need and you know you could connect them to a resource. So Laura's going to spend a few minutes talking about the individual service planning that we did while the count was going on in January. Next slide, please. Or I'm sorry, Angela, if you could go back to there we go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Natalie. During the point in time count, volunteers encounter veterans. And our goal is to link them to immediate services. So we actually had a planning team focusing on the Veteran Services Plan. And what we did is that we enhanced this plan from last year in many ways. Last year we learned, for 2019, we learned a lot about this very important piece of the point in time count. And so we added, what the plan is, or the Veteran Service Plan includes the veteran saying, yes, I need immediate services. There being a call that requests assistance, the veterans being transported somewhere so that they could start getting services, determine eligibility for veteran services, and making sure that the veterans receive the services that they are eligible for. And so what we did is that we added more assessment centers. So once the volunteer encountered someone, they asked them, would you like immediate services? If that person said yes, then they would be transported to one of 4 assessment centers. So the assessment centers that we collaborated with include the Access Center in Riverside, March Veterans Village, Liberty Village in Beaumont, and CVRM. And they were ready for anybody that was transported to that assessment center with eligibility workers from the different partner agencies that would be able to begin to check their eligibility, beginning with veteran status, because a lot of our partners thought, well, how many of these individuals are actual veterans? And so we made sure that they began with that piece, and then they were able to link up with other services. We used 10 vehicles. Each vehicle had 2 drivers. All of these vehicles were provided by our partner agencies. DPSS provided vehicles. A lot of other agencies that provide service to veterans provided vehicles, which was very helpful because we could focus on making sure that we were able to get to the person in a timely manner and not have them wait for an hour to be picked up. So the vehicles really made a difference in terms of making that transportation time faster. We had set up what we refer to as the community center or dispatch. When the volunteer encountered a veteran, they were asked to call the PIT hotline number. And that number had 3 different lines where the call would come in, and then we would begin by asking characteristics or description of the person that wanted to be picked up, where they were located, and anything that would help us find them as soon as possible. And we would call into a driver that was nearby and say, we have this veteran that needs to be picked up, and then they would head that way to pick them up. Once they picked them up, they would transfer them to the assessment center where, like I mentioned, the process would begin. Next slide. So our results for the veteran service plans was really good. I think we would have been able to do a little bit more. I'll talk about some of those issues later, but we did have 21 requests for services. 19 of those were actually transported to one of the veteran assessment centers. 2 of the veterans canceled their requests before we got to them. 14 of those individuals, we were able to confirm veteran status once they got to the assessment center, which is great because then that tells us that a lot of the times when they are saying that they're veterans, they probably are. A couple of them didn't have the proper documentation, so we had to put them on hold, but 14 on the spot, they were confirmed. 15 eligible for VASH vouchers on site, and 6 were issued on that day. 5 veterans were screened for the HDAP program, which is the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program, and one qualified. So that also was something that was started on the spot. 3 veterans were screened for the short-term rental assistance program, 1 qualified, 2 needed documents. And so it was a very successful day because we were able to provide immediate services to a lot of those veterans that asked for immediate assistance. Next slide, please. We also started thinking about what other subpopulations can we do this immediate services plan for. Of course, we have very vulnerable populations out there, one being the youth and the other being seniors. For the youth, Luis Lopez is going to talk a little bit about what happens when we find unaccompanied youth. Before he shares with you, I just wanted to share seniors. We are going to look into the possibility of providing immediate services to seniors. We did encounter one woman who was 80 years old, and she was transported and connected to adult services for immediate assistance. And so these particular service plans, I think we need to enhance a little bit more and work with our partners to make sure that everything is in place so that on the day of the count, our volunteers can focus on surveying the homeless population, and we can bring in teams that will help with those immediate services. I think Luis can tell you a little bit about how youth are provided immediate services.
Yes, for the youth service plan, we work with Operation Safe House and Safe House of the Desert, which are youth emergency shelters that provide services to youth ages 11 to 17. So for both the general and the youth count, it is an option for them to enter on the day of. We provide information to a lot of the teams that are going out into the community. And as Laura mentioned, we had a lot of information on youth awareness. So we really wanted to focus on having a plan to be able to transport these youth that were in need, who were unaccompanied, to a safe shelter. During that time, there was one unaccompanied youth that was transported to Operation Safe House. There was other youth that was encountered. Unfortunately, the program is voluntary. What we do after that is we work with local law enforcement. So we notify them that there is a homeless unaccompanied youth minor in that area. We provide them details of, maybe description, where they were located, so that way law enforcement can go ahead and make that contact and transport if needed. That's a protocol that I'd like to increase and work with Laura to try to expand and be able to provide this service to more youth in need.
Thank you so much, Luis. And then in terms of the veterans or the immediate services plan, we do want to focus a little bit more on follow-up. I know a lot of individuals that participated in the veteran service plan planning efforts want to know what happens after. A lot of times, some veterans are assessed and they don't qualify, so they are transported back to the location that were picked up. Others will receive services, like I said, immediately. And so we want to make sure that we do a good follow-up to make sure that we're able to report the final outcomes for all of the veterans that requested services on the day of the count. Next slide, please. We're going to go ahead and, if it's okay with Natalie, I'm going to just go ahead and move into the volunteer satisfaction survey. At the end of the point in time count, like I mentioned, we had 842 volunteers that went out on the day of the count early morning, 5:30 in the morning to help. And we wanted to obtain their feedback about their experience. And so we sent out to all 842 volunteers a volunteer satisfaction survey asking them their opinions about their experience and any feedback they might have. Next slide, please, Angela. For the general count, we had two different surveys. One for the general count, we had 151 individuals respond or complete that survey. For the youth count, we had 53 individuals that completed the satisfaction survey. The survey was short. It was only 12 questions, and then it had a couple of open-ended questions. What did you like about the count? What did you dislike? That type of question. And so we got some feedback, which is great. Next slide, please. One of the questions was, what was your role during the point in time count? If you want to look at the general count first, you can see that the majority of the individuals that responded to this satisfaction survey were community volunteers. 67% were community volunteers that were just participating in the point in time count and wanted to give us their feedback. For the youth count, it's very similar. You can see the majority of those individuals that completed the youth count survey were volunteers as well, community volunteers. We did have some law enforcement, deployment site leads, and DPSS coordinators that responded to the survey, but overall the majority were community volunteers. Next slide, please. One of the questions we asked was, how would you rate your experience? We think it's a very important question. For the general count, the majority of the respondents fell into the good, very good, excellent category, which is a good thing. We did have a couple of fair and poor experiences. Unfortunately, we did collect some information about why they would rate their experience as poor, but that happens. And so overall, I think we did a good job in terms of providing that good experience or positive experience for our volunteers. For the youth count, same thing. We had mainly all of the respondents fell within the excellent, the very good, and the good categories, a couple of fairs, and a couple of poor responses. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to kind of just view these comments. We pulled a couple of really good comments. I think personally, I really enjoy going through the volunteer satisfaction survey comments because it really helps me plan. It helps me get an idea of what people thought about the point in time count. There was one person that mentioned that it was really impactful for them to participate and maybe chose this, maybe possibly would be choosing their serving this homeless community as a career. Also, we got some feedback from first time count volunteers, so I'll just let you read those and give you a minute or two to do that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, like I mentioned, what did you like about the point in time count? This was an open-ended question. We pulled the top 4 response categories. We had a lot of responses, but we pulled the top 4, and we also categorized the type of response for the general count. What I noticed in terms of the open-ended responses was a lot of the responses focused on kind of the emotional part of participating in the count. They really liked engaging with homeless individuals. They really enjoyed seeing the community come together. A lot of the comments focused on the day of the count. Everyone was in really good spirits. There was a lot of cooperation, and it was nice to see city leaders participating in the count. And then increased awareness of the homeless issue. So a lot of the comments that they liked were more on kind of their personal experience and emotional piece about participating in such a great event. The number 4 was organized event. They thought that the count was effective and easy, and the structure was efficient, and the process was pretty easy. So it was great to hear that feedback. Luis, did you want to talk a little bit about the feedback we received from the youth count?
Yeah, the community working together. I think overall the volunteers enjoyed being a member of a team and spreading that awareness and being able to connect with some of those homeless youth in our community. for the awareness of homelessness issue. A lot of them have mentioned to me after the count, which is amazing. Is we've driven by a lot of these youth not knowing that they're homeless, and I think that definitely represents the challenge of youth homelessness in our county. For the experience of participating in the count, a lot of them brought to my attention that they'd like to partake and invite friends and family to be able to come out for next year, which is great. We're always trying to expand and grow the youth homeless count. Interacting with homeless individuals. For a large portion of the volunteers, it was their first time engaging with the homeless population. So it was good to see them out there connecting and showing that they want to help this vulnerable population.
Next slide, please. Okay, another question. What did you dislike about the point in time count? For the general count, we got some really good feedback. Incentives, there's not enough. Some volunteers think that we should be providing maybe food or water in our incentive bags. They are volunteering, so you are going to encounter point in time count volunteers to be very generous and very caring and sympathetic individuals. So it makes sense that they would want to be able to provide more through the incentive bags. The maps, that was something that came up a lot. Maps were hard to read. They thought that some of the maps overlapped in boundaries. The locations were not current, that the maps should be divided by region. Good feedback. A volunteer experience, some individuals feel like it's a really early start. The reason why we start early is because we want to make sure we catch everyone before they get up and go on with their day. So that is the reason why we start so early at 5:30. Some did not care for the site that they were assigned to. We do our best to meet their need in terms of where they would like to serve as a volunteer, but overall we make sure that we assign volunteers where they're most needed, and sometimes that means moving people around, so we understand that. And some individuals talked about the training, limited training. They needed more training to practice on the app. They didn't care for the training, and everyone should attend. There are some people that end up not attending a training or just show up on the day of the count because they feel like they want to help and they heard about it last minute, so they actually end up showing up. So some individuals felt like everyone should be attending the training. That's it for the general count. Luis?
Yes, for the youth count, on one of the sections, it's almost no one to count. I think with us having a lot more volunteers this year, we're able to canvass different areas within some of these communities that we selected to conduct the point in time count in. And we don't have a lot of information, so with one of the challenges of homeless youth, it's hard to come across them at times in certain locations and certain times. So I think a lot of these teams, they weren't able to encounter some of the homeless youth. So we'll definitely, look at the information to be able to create new hotspots and try to send these teams into areas we pre-identify, so that way we can hopefully have them engage a lot of the homeless youth out in our community. For the disorganized, chaotic deployment site, I spoke with Laura about this. We definitely want to increase a lot more training for the deployment site leads and the coordinators to be able to feel comfortable and have that support as well to be able to facilitate a deployment site. So we are looking into that, and hopefully we can progress and provide more information on ways to handle a deployment site. For the incentives, I think one thing that we encountered while we were out there is some of the youth would congregate with some of the older individuals. So it was easy to provide some of the older homeless individuals with some of the incentive bags, which minimized the amount that we had at a later time to be able to provide to some of the youth. So I think, you know, moving forward, we can create some smaller incentive kits, so that way we can build a rapport with, you know, that group, and we're not handing out a lot of the incentives geared for youth while we're out there. I did receive some calls for the Survey 123 app, and I think we were able to resolve some of those. But it's something that's new. It's something that we incorporated, and you know we're looking into resolving some of the issues.
Thank you, Luis. Can you provide the next slide, please, Angela? So as I mentioned when we were reviewing the volunteer satisfaction survey, the majority of the feedback that we received were for community volunteers, which is wonderful. We've already started lessons learned list, which is great. More communication with our city leaders and providing them with updates, deployment sites, continuing with those trainings and those orientations to really help them feel confident, like Luis said, in their ability to implement the count on the day of the count. It's a lot of work and it's a big responsibility for them. So we want to make sure that we provide them with that support. Volunteers, we know that we need to work on communication to volunteers. We got a lot of feedback that emails were missed. We want to make sure that we can use some technology to make sure that volunteers get more immediate and updated information about where they're being assigned and if we're asking them to move. So those are definitely lessons learned that we want to work on for 2021. Improve the volunteer assignment process. Some areas it happens. Some areas we send a certain number of volunteers. We do have a couple of no-shows, and that really affects the plan that site had for the day. So I can imagine how nerve-wracking that must be for the deployment site leads that want to do a really good job, but then they end up dealing with things that are out of their control. Incentives, always incentives are on our list. We want to be able to include more resources in those incentive bags. We want to be able to provide them earlier so that cities could add more of their information and resources, and if they want to add food and water, we know that a lot of the cities do that already. And then the survey app, provide more training, more practice. I think the more practice volunteers get, they'll feel more confident if they run across an issue with the app. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned just from the survey of the volunteer survey that we received. We definitely want to collect more feedback because the more we have, the better we have to be able to focus on those problem areas. Next slide, please.